Hi, I'm Melissa Smith, Managing Editor of Content Solutions here at HousingWire, and I'm joined today by Angel Hernandez, Vice President of Industry and Regulatory Affairs at Stabby, to talk about the state of tech adoption in the industry, particularly surrounding eSign and RUN technologies. Angel, it's so nice to have you here today. To start, we're finding that incorporating technology is important in attracting new, young employees who are tech savvy and want to be on the cutting edge. Are you finding that as well? How do you manage the more seasoned employee who might be set in their ways?
Melissa, let me answer your first question with a resounding yes. So at Stabby, we obsess about attracting and retaining employees that are on the cutting edge. Now, I would go as far as saying that we probably want Stabby and tech savvy to be seen as interchangeable terms not too long from today. The caveat perhaps will be that what is it that we mean by tech savvy tools? From that perspective, I think we would say that it's those technology tools that can take complex or sophisticated processes to deliver simplicity, right? Simplicity into somebody's work, simplicity into the experience of a homeowner as they engage with their servicer, with their originator. For your second question, I do think there's more to it than just this difference between employees that want to embrace change and those that resist change. To some extent, I would say that it's a false narrative, that it is a false dichotomy. I think resistance to adoption of technology often is a reflection of the limitations of the technology, more so than it is a reflection of people's preferences, right? So if I could perhaps maybe just illustrate that with a personal story, right? When I was in law school, I would visit home, and every time I went back, I would go and spend some time with a close family friend that, look, he was getting older, he was getting a little older in years. And it never failed. Every time I went, we would sit down, have coffee, and right before I left, he would say, "Hey, I don't know what I did. I think I moved my cables around a bit again. Would you mind setting up the VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray player for me again?" Right? I haven't really used them. Went back 3 months later, have coffee. At the end of the conversation, I knew what was coming. "Hey, before you go, can you use for 5 minutes to maybe plug in again the VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray?" I can't count the number of times, I reconfigured that, it's probably more than 5. Then one Christmas, he called me because they gave him a streaming service, right? A streaming box. And I just sort of chuckled inside and said, well, I know there's now a 4th thing I have to add to the list whenever I visit. But to my surprise, that just wasn't the case, right? I showed up, had coffee, great conversation, connected all over again, and I'm just waiting for the request to come in. And nothing, it never does, right? So right before I'm leaving, I said, well, maybe he forgot about it. So let me ask him, hey, before I go, do you need me to, plug in the VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray player again? And he said, oh, absolutely not. The streaming service just works like a wonder. And I think about how in that case, it really was, the quality of the tool he was using that, enabled that utility for him, right? That really minimized any challenges he had in adopting it. And to some extent, I think about what that same dynamic means for us, here at Stabby. So at the core, I think, you, me, we're humans, right? And humans are emotional creatures. We want to feel that our work is meaningful. We want to feel that our work is valuable. We want to feel like we're able to contribute. So at the end of the day, the quality of life for our clients, for their homeowners, or the homeowners that they serve, I should say, is really going to be measured around the quality of the emotions they experience in those interactions. Again, I'm a big believer that We all want to experience joy. So, at Stavi, we obsess about that. How do we insert joy, the joy of simplicity, into some of these complex processes? It is that same mindset, right, that influenced how we developed our loss mitigation toolkit for servicers, that enables deployment of eSign, RON, doc collaboration into the loss mitigation space, right? So taking some of the tools that we've developed to facilitate closing to say, well, how do they make sense in a servicing scenario to minimize errors, right? To deploy it in a way that servicing staff can really take that technology and in fact, minimize how long it takes them to send documents to borrowers. That enables them to ensure that the borrower executes those documents in a manner that is compliant, and that ensures that it's going to be a loss mitigation package that the servicer can use, that is reportable, if necessary, that is notarized appropriately if necessary, and that can be redelivered, as may be the case, in Ginnie Mae loans, for example. So again, it really is thinking about, what does it mean to have a tool that can be adopted by everyone? How do we do it in a way that actually, creates a joyful experience for those that do? And to do that effectively, I think it does take, design with purpose, and the purpose being, again, amplifying the experience, amplifying the capability of staff and employees. And if we do that right, I do think that dichotomy between, again, change adverse and change lovers just goes away.
So we've touched on it from an employee sentiment perspective, but let's hone in on the tech side. We've seen legacy servicing systems stand in the way of tech adoption. From your view, what's holding tech adoption back, and what are some actionable steps to overcoming those barriers?
I think that the absolute requisite for leading transformation, that is true and lasting transformation, is going to be the presence of a champion. So it's not enough to have a forward-looking servicer or a forward-looking originator that wants to adopt cutting-edge tools. You also have to have the internal support, again, those internal champions that are going to be leading the discussions, that are going to help assess the ROI and the value proposition for, again, any company's specific model. And that is where I think, technology providers like ourselves need to play a bigger role, right? So it's not enough to simply deliver a good service, a good tool into the marketplace. Since it is transformation that we are looking at, I think there's a degree of advisory services that also need to accompany that to really make the efforts of those champions effective, right? To, again, be able to work with them to identify what is the ROI, what is the value proposition, not just in terms of operations and efficiencies, but also in bottom line. And look, as I noted in the first question, the experience of the staff, right? Ensure that it is something that is going to work for their people, right? So at Stavi, I think a common theme for us is, we look at the ecosystem and we see one that is fragmented, right? And we see that this fragmentation creates challenges and creates costs. So we really want to transform away from this fragmented framework into one that provides for trusted and seamless experiences, where technology does the work so that people can focus most on what matters most, I should say. So, when I think about this in the servicing space, right, we want servicing staff to be able to focus on those homeowner interactions, right? Addressing their questions, addressing those questions timely, providing the information they need, and delivering the services, the documents that the homeowner needs, whether it's, again, in good times or in difficult times. I know much has been said about, the presence of legacy systems, which to some degree give rise to this fragmentation that I referenced. But I think it's important also to acknowledge that, look, the status quo has served us quite well. right? I mean, at the end of the day, we just went through a stress test scenario last couple of years, and have come out of it in a way that perhaps is better than many would have anticipated a couple of years back. So as a new provider in the segment at Stabby, we think about, what does it mean to be able to amplify the capabilities that already exist? How does it most make sense for us to partner, again, with existing service providers, with new service providers, to create the experience that is going to be the optimum experience for homeowners, and that is actually going to give rise to that loyalty between service providers and servicers and originators that we're all after, right? So again, just taking loss mitigation as a use case, right? We looked at, on the origination side, right, there's been quite a bit of push to adopt electronic closings, to enable electronic signatures, to enable remote online notarizations, to enable audiovisual communications to create that experience with the homeowner. We think the same is applicable, perhaps even more so, in a loss mitigation case where timelines could really matter, right? Whether getting a loan modification package returned timely and accurately can make a difference for a homeowner of being able to enter into a new payment plan, or going further down the rabbit hole of delinquency, where you're dealing with potentially the distressed homeowners, folks that have to juggle multiple jobs, right? What does it mean to be able to provide them the convenience of executing everything they need to within a single audiovisual session at a time of their choosing, at a time that is most convenient for them, that best fits their own lifestyle and their own needs, right? So again, we've looked at how, again, those eClosing tools, for lack of better terms, have been able to create some flexibility and some options for the initial closing. And look, we've also come up with the way that they can be leveraged in other scenarios across the life cycle. And again, I do think that, to be able to do this well, we need to ensure that the right collaboration is in place across all parts of the ecosystem. And I do think we've entered an era where we all recognize that, right? I think, again, the adoption of those tools has revealed the need to shake up the status quo. So I do think, again, that collaboration is a mutually beneficial arrangement, and I do expect to see that going forward.
On that note of transformation, does it make sense for a servicer to adopt RON and eSign, even if the origination arm is not doing eNotes yet?
The risk of repeating myself here in the same interview, I will echo another resounding yes. In fact, I think that adopting eSign and RON in scenarios where origination hasn't quite gone down the eClosing path may actually be a winning business strategy. And here's why I say that. Look, earlier today, we discussed just some of the challenges that staff and people may face in finding a new way of doing things, right? We've talked about some of the issues that can come about from integration, or I should say, the lack of proper integration. Both of those really get highlighted quite a bit when thinking about the adoption of an eClosing platform on the origination side, right? Some time ago, I had the privilege of serving as the lead for the digital collateral program at Ginnie Mae, where my job was to walk servicers through the process of delivering eNotes as Ginnie Mae issuers. And if there's a takeaway I have from that experience, it's just how much difficulty they had in really making each of those components live, right? So I mean, your docs have to integrate well with your e-signing process, which has to be well integrated to your ROM process. There's that eVault component that follows how well it works with the MERS e-registry and how well it works with other downstream eVaults that may be involved, whether it's in an aggregator scenario or, again, delivering into Fannie or Ginnie. All that to say that, it's quite a bit to think through, to solve for. Again, I think as tech providers, we need to play a key role in facilitating that. But it's not to undermine the fact that it is quite a few components that have to be solved for. On the loss mitigation side, the equation is not as complex, right? A servicer is able, again, to deploy electronic signatures and RON to conduct loan modifications without the need for bringing in those additional components that would be, again, at play on an eClosing scenario. So to me, I think that has at least two direct benefits. One is going to help in the training of staff and in building that institutional know-how of how these tools work and how you can leverage them. And B, look, it gets you a portion of the way into eClosings, right? So perhaps if you were thinking about adopting eClosings anyway, right? If having some activities done on the servicing side, that's knowledge that is transferable. Now, I do fully understand that's going to differ based on the model of the firm, right? To what extent they do play in both origination and servicing. But again, for those that do, my point is that deploying into servicing might be an easier path into full adoption of digital mortgage technology than it would starting on closings from day one.
How can RON and eSign be used in other servicing contexts outside of loan modifications?
I think the options are unlimited. Just as we deployed eSign and RON to develop a specific workflow for loss mitigation, we have done the same for foreclosure processes. If we step back and we think about what are the functions that teams are performing, again, we go back to the need to share documents, review documents, execute those in certain situations, have them notarized. Now, there's no reason why we're able to do that for a closing or for loan modification, and not also do it in the foreclosure context. To some extent, I would argue that ensuring that there's adequate controls and ensuring the highest degree of accuracy are even more important, right, in a foreclosure setting, because this is by its very nature a task that is going to be difficult for those involved, right? Earlier I mentioned that, at Stabby, we want to have technology that enables people to focus on what matters most. And in this setting, right, we hope that by delivering a tool that can increase accuracy and decrease cost into what is already a stress-filled scenario, we can enable this default servicing team again to focus on what matters most, and that is addressing the needs of homeowners that are probably experience a great deal of distress. So my answer is that how these tools can be used, it's almost unlimited if you have the right partner at the table. If we even step outside of servicing, I also think about what does it mean for realtors, right, to make more and better use of eSign and RON. To the extent that there's been, like in every other segment, right, a bit of resistance to adopting. I'll go back to some of the points I've already made today, and that is, it's about being able to ensure that the realtors can create the experience that is aligned with those objectives they have for how they engage with their customers. I think there's much more that we could do as tech providers to enable that. But if we just step back and think about what is likely to happen is that, look, just like it's the case for an originator, having partnerships in place that enable a realtor to address the myriad of situations that a potential homeowner can encounter is going to be a benefit, right? Particularly when we think about perhaps anyone focused on serving our service members or veterans, right? That look, they may be deployed, right? So having a realtor that, again, has a network in place that's going to give them the confidence that no matter what the situation is for that potential homeowner, they'll be able to get them to the closing table, right? I think it's going to matter. And the fact is, we are experiencing a change in demographics that is going to come with the change in expectations. I think back to my very own most recent home purchase experience. Right in the midst of COVID, I met my realtor through a referral service, right, through an online lender. I viewed the homes, 7 of the 10 homes that I viewed virtually. I pushed for a hybrid closing. And I think about the fact that every now and then I still get a piece of mail, right, from a realtor. And I'm a little astounded, right? And that just wasn't how I engaged. That just wasn't the nature of my experience. So look, there's a more digital world that is upon all of us. Again, and at the very least, having the flexibility to offer that to potential homeowners, it is, again, a net positive in that space. So again, I think we have tools, and I think we need to work together on ensuring that, look, that we can deploy them into as many parts of the ecosystem as possible, not only because it's a better process, not only because it increases accuracy, but there's also, I would argue, an ecological benefit of doing so, right? Of eliminating the printing, of eliminating the paper, of eliminating the shipping and the fuel costs that go along with that. So again, it is very few times in life where you can have product or a service that truly yields as many benefits as it would for us to really transform our industry from a paper-based process to a digital mortgage ecosystem.
The pandemic led to an uptick in the use of RON and eSign. Will the end of forbearance policies limit the value of digital servicing tools?
Well, for a bit of variety, I'm not going to give you a resounding no. I don't think so. When I think about the COVID-related policies that were put in place to protect, the housing finance segment, I typically think of those as falling into one of 3 buckets, right? So bucket 1 would be all of the flexibilities that were permitted, whether in the appraisal space, for example, or even in the RON space, right? We saw a flurry of state-level activity to enable remote notarization. I also think about the second bucket, which were those measures put in place to safeguard homeowners against losing their home in the midst of the pandemic, right? So that is where the forbearance policies, the moratoria really fall into. The third bucket, however, was just a series of revisions to loss mitigation options to better assist homeowners exiting those forbearance plans. Now, as we know, that period of forbearance is largely, over. But I think that the revisions to the loss mitigation options, or at least the primary point of focus that it underlies each of those revisions, I think that's here to stay. There's a big focus that was reflected in those revisions on streamlining, right? So streamlining communications with the borrower, streamlining execution of loan modifications, minimizing the requirements that have to be met before a loan can be modified. So I think that is here to stay, right? And it is precisely for this type of streamlining that tools like eSign and RON were created for. So I would argue that that the value of this digital servicing tools is going forward, it's only going to increase exponentially as more servicers begin, in fact, adopting them and deploying them. And look, this is not just an opinion. This is something we believe wholeheartedly here at Stabby. We've invested in intellectual property that lets us create workflows where a loan modification a package can be, both countersigned and counter notarized, which is something that is a little different than what happens in the eClosing space, in a way that it safeguards the integrity of the borrower's signature, right? And the servicer signature that comes at some point, that could come at some point after that, right? While maintaining the integrity of the document and the security of it. So again, this is something we believe. We're invested in this, and we look forward to seeing how the use of digital servicing tools only grows.
Angel, it's been so great to hear your views on tech adoption, innovation, and what's next for eSign and RON technologies. Thanks so much for joining us today.